The grand amphitheater of xenobiological sciences at Galactic University was, without question, the most pretentious room in the known galaxy. Crystal formations jutted from the walls like frozen lightning, each one programmed to pulse with soft blue light whenever someone said something the architects deemed academically significant. The seats were arranged in perfect concentric circles, because apparently regular rows were too primitive for beings who had mastered faster-than-light travel. Professor Korthak stood at the center podium, all four of his arms gesturing dramatically as he adjusted his holographic display for the third time. He was what you might call a Zentorian, if you were being polite, or a walking coat rack with delusions of grandeur if you were being honest. His species had evolved from some sort of ancient tree creature, which explained both his height and his tendency to look down on everyone else. Literally, the guy was 8 feet tall and never let anyone forget it. "Students of the cosmos," he began, his voice carrying that particular tone that professors reserve for topics they consider beneath their intellectual pay grade. "Today we embark upon a journey through the most dangerous, most feared, most evolutionarily superior predators our galaxy has to offer." The audience consisted of the usual suspects you'd find at any self-respecting interstellar university. There was Bleep, an insectoid from the hive worlds, whose compound eyes reflected the light in a way that made him look perpetually surprised. Next to him sat Gornax, a silicon-based lifeform who looked like someone had taught a boulder how to take notes. His species communicated through subsonic vibrations, which meant he spent most lectures humming at frequencies that made everyone else's teeth itch. Then there was Zara, a crystalline from the Refraction Nebula, who literally sparkled when she was interested in something. And Mork, a gelatinous blob from the Pudding Systems, who had to wear a specially designed containment suit to prevent himself from accidentally absorbing his textbooks. And in the back row, looking thoroughly entertained by the whole production, sat Jake Morrison. The human. Jake was part of the cultural exchange program, which was really just a fancy way of saying let's see if these new species can handle higher education without starting an interstellar incident. So far humans had a pretty good track record, mostly because they tended to ask interesting questions and didn't try to eat their classmates. Well, except for that one incident with the Thanksgiving turkey demonstration, but that was a cultural misunderstanding that everyone agreed to never speak of again. Professor Korthak cleared his throat, a sound like gravel being stirred in a cement mixer. "Now I'm sure many of you come from worlds where you believe your local fauna represents the pinnacle of predatory evolution. This is of course a common misconception among less developed civilizations." His 4 eyes swept the room with practiced condescension. When his gaze landed on Jake, one of his arms made a dismissive gesture. "I trust our human representative will find this particularly educational, given his species' recent emergence from what can only be described as a garden world." Jake just smiled and pulled out his notebook, a quaint paper and pen combination that made several students flinch. Apparently the idea of killing plant matter to record information was considered either barbaric or revolutionary depending on your perspective. Today, the professor continued, "We shall explore the true hierarchy of galactic apex predators. We shall examine creatures so fearsome, so perfectly adapted for destruction, that entire star systems have been quarantined simply to contain them." The crystal formations began pulsing more rapidly, apparently recognizing the academic significance of impending doom and gloom lectures. "By the end of this session, you will understand why certain species have earned their place at the top of the food chain, while others," his gaze drifted back to Jake, "remain safely relegated to the bottom, where they belong." Jake's smile widened just a fraction. He clicked his pen once, twice, 3 times, a sound that somehow managed to be both innocent and ominous in the vast, pretentious chamber. The professor activated his holographic display with a flourish of all 4 arms, and the real show began. The first hologram materialized with the dramatic flair of someone who had clearly practiced this presentation in front of a mirror. A lot. The creature that appeared was roughly the size of a small starship, and looked like someone had crossed a dragon with a bad attitude and a subscription to a gym membership. "Behold," Professor Korthak announced, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was an appropriately reverent whisper, "the Vorthan death serpent of Proxima Nightmare." The holographic beast writhed in the air above them, its scales shifting through colors that hurt to look at directly. Each scale was apparently the size of a dinner plate, and the creature's mouth opened to reveal 3 rows of teeth that could double as industrial mining equipment. Native to the methane storms of Proxima Nightmare, this magnificent specimen measures an average of 200 meters in length, possesses a hide capable of deflecting plasma artillery, and secretes a neurotoxin so potent that it can kill a Gorillian battle rhino through skin contact alone. Gornax hummed appreciatively, a sound like distant thunder. Several students leaned forward in their seats, and Zara sparkled with what was either fascination or impending nausea. The death serpent, the professor continued, warming to his subject like a used spaceship salesman, represents the apex of evolutionary perfection. It has no natural predators, requires no social structure, and has remained genetically unchanged for over 50 million years. Perfection, my dear students, does not require improvement. Jake made a note in his notebook. The scratching of his pen seemed unusually loud in the reverent silence. Professor Korthak gestured, and the death serpent was replaced by something that looked like a praying mantis designed by a committee of horror movie directors with unlimited budgets and severe psychological issues. The crystal mantis of Kepler 442b, he announced. Standing 12 feet tall, armed with forelimbs capable of slicing through starship hulls, and possessed of compound eyes that can track 17 different targets simultaneously. Bleep's own compound eyes reflected the hologram with obvious appreciation. My homeworld's hive guardians are similar, he clicked, though somewhat smaller. Ah yes, the professor nodded condescendingly. The hive guardians, impressive specimens to be sure, though they lacked the crystal mantis's ability to phase shift through solid matter. Still, a respectable entry in our hierarchy. The crystal mantis faded, replaced by something that made several students actually recoil in their seats. It looked like living shadow with too many teeth and a serious attitude problem. The shadow stalkers of the void, Professor Korthak intoned, and even his pompous delivery couldn't hide a slight tremor in his voice. Perhaps the most feared predators in known space, they exist partially outside our dimensional framework, hunt in perfect silence across the vacuum of space itself, and have been known to disable entire space stations by simply existing in their vicinity. The hologram writhed and shifted, never quite maintaining a consistent shape. Jake squinted at it, tilting his head slightly like someone trying to solve a particularly interesting puzzle. These creatures, the professor continued, represent the absolute pinnacle of predatory evolution. They are living weapons, honed by millions of years of natural selection into perfect killing machines. More creatures followed in rapid succession, the acid worms of Sulfur Prime, each one capable of dissolving a small moon given enough time and motivation. The psychic leeches of the Dream Nebula, which could drain the life force from an entire starship crew without ever physically manifesting. The temporal spiders of Kronos Station, which hunted their prey by manipulating time itself. Each revelation was met with appropriate oohs and ahs from the student body. Mork actually increased his viscosity to the point where his containment suit's pressure warning started beeping. Zara was sparkling so brightly she was becoming a navigational hazard. You see, Professor Korthak said, his forearms spread wide in a gesture that encompassed the entire display. These creatures represent the true aristocracy of the food chain. They are evolution's masterpieces, refined over eons into perfect instruments of destruction and survival. He paused for effect, his gaze sweeping the room with the satisfaction of someone who knew he had his audience exactly where he wanted them. Compare this, if you will, to the so-called predators of garden worlds. Creatures that have never faced true evolutionary pressure, never been forced to adapt or perish. They exist in a state of comfortable mediocrity, untested by the harsh realities of natural selection. His four eyes fixed on Jake again, and his voice took on that particular tone that academics use when they're about to make a point they consider devastatingly clever. I trust this provides some perspective on the relative, shall we say, developmental status of various worlds and their inhabitants. Jake looked up from his notebook, pen poised thoughtfully over the paper. The smile on his face was pleasant, innocent, and absolutely terrifying if you knew what to look for. That's really fascinating, Professor, he said, his voice carrying just enough curiosity to sound genuine. I do have a question though. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that happens right before something very important breaks. Professor Korthak's forearms froze in mid-gesture, his holographic display flickering slightly as if it too was holding its breath. By all means, the professor said, his tone suggesting that he was doing Jake an enormous favor by acknowledging his existence. Though I should warn you that this is graduate-level xenobiology, not remedial planetary studies. Jake's smile didn't waver. Oh, I'm sure I can keep up. I was just wondering, where would Earth tigers rank on this hierarchy? The question hung in the air like a badly tuned gravitational field. Several students turned to look at Jake with expressions ranging from confusion to pity. Bleep's compound eyes somehow managed to convey the universal sentiment of second-hand embarrassment. Professor Korthak blinked all four eyes in sequence, a gesture that in Zentaurian culture indicated either deep thought or profound disbelief. I beg your pardon. Tigers, Jake repeated helpfully. You know, big cats, orange with black stripes? I was just curious about where they'd fit in your classification system. The professor's laugh was the kind of sound you might hear if a tree fell in a forest and the forest was really pretentious about it. My dear human, Earth is classified as a Class G garden world. Pleasant climate, abundant vegetation, mild seasonal variations. The Galactic survey specifically noted the absence of any significant predatory species. Huh, Jake said, making another note. That's interesting, because tigers are usually around 600 pounds of muscle, with 4-inch canine teeth and claws that can extend to about 4 inches as well. They can leap horizontally up to 30 feet and vertically about 12 feet. Oh, and they're ambush predators that hunt primarily at night. The scratching of Jake's pen had somehow become the loudest sound in the amphitheater. Professor Korthak's forearms began making small uncertain gestures, like he was trying to conduct an orchestra but had forgotten the music. Surely you exaggerate, the professor said, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. Garden worlds by definition lack apex predators of any significant threat level. Well, I mean, significant is relative, right? Jake said, flipping through his notebook. Tigers can bite with a force of about 1,000 pounds per square inch. For comparison, that's enough pressure to crush most bones. They're also excellent swimmers, can climb trees, and have night vision that's about 6 times better than human vision. Zara had stopped sparkling entirely, which in crystalline culture was roughly equivalent to fainting. Mork's containment suit was making concerned beeping noises as his stress levels spiked. And these tigers, Professor Korthak said carefully. They coexist with humans on your world. Oh sure, Jake said cheerfully. Well, not so much anymore. We kind of hunted most of them. There used to be a lot more, but you know how it is. Urban development, agriculture, that sort of thing. We've got maybe 4,000 left in the wild now. The professor sat down rather suddenly in his levitating chair, which bobbed slightly under the unexpected weight distribution. Hunted them, had to really. I mean, they were eating people. Jake shrugged, as if this was the most reasonable thing in the world. Though to be fair, we probably encroached on their territory first. Humans aren't always great at sharing space with large predators. Gornax's humming had taken on a distinctly nervous quality, like geological anxiety made audible. Bleep was rapidly clicking in what was either his species' equivalent of prayers or profanity, and from the speed of the clicks, probably both. But surely, the professor said, grasping at straws that were probably also classified as dangerous on some worlds. These tigers represent the apex of predation on your world. The most dangerous creature your garden paradise has produced. Jake looked genuinely surprised. Tigers? Oh no, they're not even close to the most dangerous thing on Earth. I mean, they're impressive and all, but we've got way scarier stuff than that. The holographic display flickered and went out entirely, as if the equipment itself had decided it needed a moment to process this information. In the sudden dimness of the amphitheater, Jake's pen clicking sounded like a countdown timer. Way scarier? Professor Korthak's voice cracked slightly on the last word. Oh yeah, Jake said, his enthusiasm growing like a wildfire in an oxygen-rich atmosphere. I mean, if we're talking about things that can actually kill you, tigers are more like intermediate level, I guess? We've got stuff that makes tigers look like house cats. Professor Korthak made a sound that was somewhere between a cough and the noise a small moon makes when it's having an existential crisis. Intermediate level. Yeah, absolutely, Jake said, warming to his subject like a solar flare, warming to the concept of electromagnetic radiation. I mean, don't get me wrong, tigers are definitely dangerous. But they're mammals, right? Warm-blooded, predictable behavior patterns, limited to terrestrial environments. Now if you want to talk about really dangerous Earth predators, you've got to consider the sharks. The word sharks seemed to hang in the air like a curse word at a religious convention. Sharks, Bleep repeated, his clicks taking on a distinctly worried cadence. These are aquatic predators, some of the best, Jake confirmed. Great whites, for instance. Up to 20 feet long, 3,000 pounds, teeth that regrow constantly throughout their lives. They can bite with a force of about 4,000 pounds per square inch, detect electrical fields from other organisms, and smell blood from miles away. Zara managed a weak sparkle, but surely these sharks remain in your oceans, safely contained in aquatic environments. Jake's grin took on a quality that made several students unconsciously scoot their chairs back. Well, most of them sure, but humans swim in those oceans. For fun. We have entire industries built around recreational ocean activities. Surfing, diving, swimming. Kids learn to swim before they can walk properly in some places. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that usually precedes either enlightenment or complete psychological breakdown. You voluntarily enter the hunting grounds of these sharks, Gornax's subsonic humming was now registering on the amphitheater's seismic sensors. All the time, Jake said cheerfully. Though to be fair, shark attacks are pretty rare. You're more likely to be killed by a cow than a shark, statistically speaking. Professor Korthak perked up slightly. Ah, so these cows are your true apex predators then? What? No, cows are livestock. We eat them. I just meant they kill more people per year because there are more opportunities for cow-related accidents. You know, farming mishaps, stampedes, that sort of thing. The professor's forearms began making confused gestures that looked like he was trying to surrender to an enemy he couldn't identify. You eat your predators. We eat everything, Jake said with the casual pride of someone discussing a hobby. Cows, pigs, chickens, fish, sharks, deer, elk, moose. Pretty much anything that moves, really. And a lot of things that don't move. We're omnivores with ambition. Mork's containment suit alarms were now providing a steady background harmony to Gornax's increasingly agitated humming. But what about the truly dangerous creatures? Mork managed to gurgle through his suit's communication system. Surely your world has apex predators that even humans fear. Oh, we've got those too, Jake said, flipping through his notebook again. Saltwater crocodiles, for instance. They can grow up to 23 feet long, have the strongest bite force of any animal on Earth at about 3,700 pounds per square inch, and they're basically living dinosaurs that decided extinction was optional. And these crocodiles, Professor Korthak said weakly. They coexist with human populations. In some areas, yeah, Australia's got loads of them. Australians are pretty casual about it though. They've got signs posted like warning, crocodiles present, and people just sort of work around them. Bleeps clicking had evolved into what sounded like mechanical sobbing. What about smaller predators? Surely your world's smaller creatures are less threatening. Jake's eyes lit up with the enthusiasm of someone who had just been asked about their favorite subject. Oh man, you want to talk about small but deadly? We've got army ants that travel in colonies of 20 million individuals and can strip a large animal to bones in hours. Bullet ants with stings so painful that indigenous peoples use them in warrior initiation rituals. The pain is supposed to be like being shot, hence the name. Surely these are isolated to remote regions, Zara whispered, her crystalline structure flickering between transparent and opaque. Not really, Jake said. I mean, army ants are pretty much everywhere in tropical regions. And speaking of small but terrifying, we've got box jellyfish that are practically invisible in the water and can kill an adult human in minutes. Their tentacles can be up to 10 feet long, and the venom attacks the heart, nervous system, and skin cells simultaneously. The holographic display system chose this moment to attempt a reboot, casting eerie blue shadows across the increasingly pale faces of the student body. But ocean predators are contained to aquatic environments, Professor Korthak said, grasping for any remaining thread of his worldview. Well sure, but humans go in the oceans all the time. We surf, we dive, we swim for exercise. Some humans spend their entire lives on the ocean, and it's not just box jellyfish down there. We've got blue-ringed octopi that are about the size of a human hand, but carry enough venom to kill 26 adults. They're actually kind of beautiful bright blue rings that pulse when they're agitated. Of course, if you're close enough to see the rings, you're probably already dead. Gornax had stopped humming entirely, which in his species indicated either deep meditation or complete system shutdown. There's also cone snails, Jake continued, apparently oblivious to the psychological carnage he was wreaking. They look like pretty shells you might pick up on a beach, but they fire harpoon-like teeth filled with neurotoxins. No antivenom exists for most species. And humans, Mork gurgled desperately, humans avoid these creatures. Yes, Jake looked genuinely puzzled. Avoid them? Not really. I mean, we're careful, but people collect shells all the time. Snorkeling and scuba diving are huge tourist industries. My sister went diving in Australia last year and got some great photos of blue-ringed octopi. The amphitheater's environmental systems kicked in with a soft whoosh, apparently detecting elevated stress levels among the occupants. Your sister, Professor Korthak said slowly, deliberately sought out these lethal creatures for photographs. Well yeah, they're beautiful. And the photos were amazing. Though she did mention that the dive master seemed a bit nervous about how close she got. Bleep managed one final desperate click. But surely your world has safe spaces, regions where humans live without threat from these predators. Jake considered this seriously. I mean, cities are pretty safe, generally speaking. Though we do get the occasional mountain lion in suburban areas. And bears, obviously. Black bears, brown bears, polar bears depending on the region. Polar bears are probably the most dangerous. They're the only bear species that actively hunts humans as prey. The last words echoed in the amphitheater like a funeral bell tolling for the collective sanity of everyone present. Professor Korthak's forearms were now making erratic gestures that looked like he was either conducting a symphony of chaos or trying to manually restart his brain. This cannot be accurate. The Galactic survey would have classified your world as a death world if these claims were true. Jake looked genuinely confused by this statement. Death world? Really? Earth's actually considered pretty mild by most standards. I mean, it's not like we have to deal with volcanic activity every day or constant radiation storms. Mild, Professor Korthak repeated, the word coming out like he was testing the flavor of poison. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, most of the really dangerous stuff died out millions of years ago. Jake pulled out his phone, a device that caused several students to recoil as if he'd just brandished a weapon, which, given what they were learning about Earth, wasn't an entirely unreasonable reaction. What is that device? Zara managed to whisper. It's just my phone, portable computer, communication device, camera, GPS, internet access. Pretty standard stuff. Jake swiped through his apps with casual familiarity while the alien students watched in fascination and horror. The idea that humans carried personal computers as casually as other species carried breathing apparatus was apparently deeply unsettling. You wanted proof about Earth predators, right? Jake said, pulling up a video application. I've got some nature documentaries on here. My little nephew loves this stuff. The phrase "my little nephew loves this stuff" seemed to break something fundamental in several students' worldviews. Jake found what he was looking for and projected the video onto the amphitheater's main display. The first image showed a pride of lions taking down a Cape buffalo, the massive herbivore struggling futilely against multiple predators working in coordinated precision. Lions, Jake explained cheerfully, as if he was showing vacation photos instead of footage of a gruesome predator-prey interaction. African lions typically hunt in groups called prides. The females do most of the hunting while the males defend territory. A single lioness can take down prey twice her size, but they usually work together for efficiency. The video showed the buffalo finally succumbing, and the lions beginning to feed while their prey was still technically alive. Mork's containment suit began playing what sounded like funeral music, apparently his species' automatic response to witnessing existential horror. This is considered entertainment, for your young. Bleep managed to click out. Educational entertainment. Jake corrected. Kids love learning about animals. Though we usually skip the really graphic parts for the younger ones. He swiped to the next video. Oh, here's a good one. Orcas hunting seals. The footage showed a massive black and white shape launching itself completely out of the water to snatch a seal from an ice floe. The orca's size was difficult to comprehend until Jake helpfully provided context. Orcas can be up to 32 feet long, and weigh up to 6 tons. They're actually the largest members of the dolphin family, and they're incredibly intelligent. They hunt in coordinated pods, use tools, and have distinct cultural behaviors that vary between populations. These creatures, Professor Korthak said faintly, they're related to dolphins. The peaceful, intelligent marine mammals mentioned in several xenobiology texts. Same family, yeah. Though orcas are apex predators. They hunt great white sharks, actually. Flip them upside down to induce tonic immobility, then eat their livers. Very efficient. The next video showed exactly that scenario. A massive orca casually dispatching what the class had just learned was one of Earth's most feared predators. Your dolphins, Gornax rumbled in subsonic frequencies that made the floor vibrate. They hunt your sharks. Some of them, sure. Dolphins are actually pretty hardcore when they want to be. They've been known to kill for sport, engage in what can only be described as warfare between pods, and they're one of the few species other than humans that engages in recreational drug use. Recreational drug use, several voices asked in unison. They pass around pufferfish to get high off the toxins. Scientists have footage of dolphin pods basically having drug parties. Jake swiped to another video showing dolphins gently nudging a pufferfish between them. Their behavior clearly altered by whatever chemicals they were absorbing. The amphitheater was now filled with the sounds of various species experiencing what could only be described as collective psychological breakdown. Zara was flickering between solid and translucent so rapidly she was becoming a strobe light. Gornax's humming had become a low moan that resonated through the building's superstructure. But surely, Professor Korthak tried desperately, Your human settlements are protected from these creatures. Surely your species has developed technology to keep them at bay. Jake looked at him with genuine surprise. Keep them at bay? Why would we do that? We keep most of these animals in zoos so people can see them up close. Kids go on field trips to look at lions and tigers and bears. It's educational. The word zoos seemed to require translation for several students. When they finally understood that humans deliberately captured dangerous predators and displayed them for public viewing, Bleep's clicking became so rapid it sounded like a data transmission error. And these zoos, they're secure facilities? Professor Korthak asked weakly. Pretty secure. Yeah, though animals do escape sometimes. There was that tiger that got loose in San Francisco a few years back, and various snake incidents. Oh, and that time all those exotic animals got released in Ohio. That was a mess. Jake swiped through more videos as he spoke, showing casual interactions between humans and animals that the aliens were beginning to recognize as instruments of death. A man swimming with great white sharks, a woman hand-feeding polar bears, children petting what Jake casually identified as only mildly venomous as snakes. This footage, Zara managed to flicker out. It shows humans deliberately interacting with these predators. Oh yeah, all the time. Steve Irwin made a whole career out of it. The crocodile hunter, he used to wrestle crocodiles and handle venomous snakes for television shows. Kids loved him. Used to, Mork gurgled ominously. Yeah, he died when a stingray barb pierced his heart. Freak accident, really. Stingrays aren't usually aggressive toward humans. Jake paused thoughtfully. Though that reminds me, we should probably mention stingrays. They're usually pretty docile, but they've got venomous barbs that they use for defense. People step on them in shallow water sometimes. People wade in waters containing venomous creatures. Professor Korthak's question came out as a series of disconnected syllables. All the time. Beaches are huge tourist destinations. Swimming, surfing, snorkeling, fishing. The oceans where a lot of people go to relax. Jake pulled up another video. This one showing a man freediving with what appeared to be a school of hammerhead sharks. Hammerheads are actually pretty cool. Their head shape gives them enhanced sensory capabilities, and they can detect electrical fields from other organisms. This guy's swimming with them without any protective equipment. Without protective equipment. Bleep repeated, his clicks taking on a distinctly hysterical quality. Well, I mean, he's got a wetsuit for temperature regulation, but no cage or anything. That's pretty normal for experienced divers. The video continued, showing the human swimming calmly among creatures that could have easily killed him, apparently for no reason other than personal enjoyment. Your species, Professor Korthak said, his voice taking on the tone of someone working through a particularly difficult mathematical proof, deliberately seeks out dangerous predators, for recreation. Some people do, sure. Extreme sports are pretty popular. Shark diving, mountain climbing in bear country, swimming with wild dolphins. There's a whole tourist industry built around it. Jake swiped to a new video showing a man in what appeared to be a small boat, hand-feeding massive crocodiles. Crocodile tours are pretty popular in Australia and Florida. People pay to get up close to wild crocodiles. They pay, Gornax rumbled, the words causing minor seismic activity, to expose themselves to apex predators. Good money too. Wildlife tourism is a multi-billion-dollar industry. The final video Jake showed was perhaps the most psychologically damaging of all. It depicted a human child, perhaps 10 years old, calmly presenting what Jake identified as a science project about venomous snakes. The child handled preserved specimens with casual familiarity, while explaining the various ways different species could kill an adult human. Education starts early, Jake explained, apparently oblivious to the mass psychological trauma he was inflicting. Kids learn to identify dangerous species as part of basic safety training. By the time they're teenagers, most humans can recognize and avoid several dozen potentially lethal creatures. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that occurs at the heat death of the universe. When all energy has been exhausted and entropy has reached its maximum state. Several dozen, Professor Korthak whispered. The words barely audible. Well, you have to, really. Depending on where you live, you might encounter black widows, brown recluses, rattlesnakes, coral snakes, mountain lions, bears, alligators, fire ants, killer bees, and that's just in North America. Other continents have their own fun varieties. Jake put his phone away, apparently satisfied with his impromptu nature documentary presentation. So anyway, back to your original question about where tigers would rank in the galactic hierarchy. I'd say they're definitely in the upper tier for terrestrial predators, but probably not even in the top 10 for Earth-based threats to human life. The amphitheater's environmental systems were now working overtime, trying to process the collective oxygen debt created by an entire classroom of beings who had apparently forgotten how to breathe properly. Professor Korthak sat in his levitating chair like a man who had just discovered that everything he thought he knew about the universe was not only wrong but catastrophically, apocalyptically wrong. His forearms hung limp at his sides, occasionally twitching, as if his nervous system was attempting to process information that violated several fundamental laws of academic pomposity. Not even in the top 10, he repeated, the words coming out like a confession at a war crimes tribunal. Well, I mean, tigers are impressive, Jake said, apparently trying to be helpful. But if we're talking about things that actually kill humans, you've got to consider mosquitoes. They're probably the deadliest animal on Earth in terms of total human deaths per year. The word mosquitoes seemed to echo in the amphitheater like a death sentence. Mosquitoes, Bleep managed to click weakly. These are apex predators. What? No. They're tiny insects. About the size of your fingernail. But they spread diseases like malaria, dengue fever, yellow fever, Zika virus, West Nile virus. Millions of people die from mosquito-borne illnesses every year. The implication that Earth's most lethal creature was smaller than most beings' fingernails appeared to break something fundamental in several students' ability to process reality. Tiny insects, Zara flickered, her crystalline structure now pulsing with what could only be described as existential panic. Smaller than fingernails. Millions of deaths. Yeah, but they're not really predators in the traditional sense. They're more like mobile disease vectors. The females need blood to produce eggs, so they bite mammals, birds, reptiles, whatever's available. It's the pathogens they carry that do the real damage. Gornax's subsonic humming had evolved into something that sounded like tectonic plates filing for divorce. Your world has creatures so small they cannot be seen, yet they kill millions. Well, you can see mosquitoes. They're just small. The pathogens they carry are microscopic though. Bacteria, viruses, parasites. Earth's got a really impressive collection of microscopic life that can kill you in creative ways. Professor Korthak made a sound that was somewhere between a whimper and the noise a dying star makes when it realizes it's about to go supernova. Microscopic. Predators. I wouldn't call them predators, exactly. More like opportunistic parasites. Though I guess some of them are pretty aggressive. Flesh-eating bacteria, for instance. Necrotizing fasciitis. It can destroy soft tissue at a rate of several inches per hour. The environmental systems gave up entirely at this point, apparently deciding that if the occupants of the amphitheater wanted to hyperventilate themselves into unconsciousness, that was their prerogative. Several inches per hour. Mork gurgled through his containment suit, which was now displaying what appeared to be his species' equivalent of a panic attack in real-time biometric data. Yeah, it's pretty nasty. Though to be fair, it's relatively rare. Most people go their entire lives without encountering flesh-eating bacteria. Unlike mosquitoes, which are basically everywhere humans live. Jake paused thoughtfully, then added with the casual air of someone discussing the weather, oh, that reminds me. I should probably mention that humans have actually driven several of Earth's apex predators to extinction. We're pretty good at large-scale species eradication when we put our minds to it. The silence that followed was so complete that it seemed to have its own gravitational field. Extinction, Professor Korthak said, the word barely a whisper. You eliminated your apex predators. Well, some of them. Saber-toothed cats, cave bears, dire wolves, giant short-faced bears that were 12 feet tall and weighed a ton. Most of the megafauna didn't survive human expansion. We're really efficient hunters when we work together. 12 feet tall, 1 ton. Cave bears. Bleep's clicking had become so erratic it sounded like a malfunctioning data processor. Yeah, they were probably the largest land predators humans ever had to deal with. Well, except for the occasional dinosaur overlap. But that's a whole different geological era. Dinosaurs. Several voices said in unison, the word hanging in the air like a curse. Oh, we never had to deal with dinosaurs directly. They went extinct about 65 million years before humans evolved. Though to be fair, birds are technically dinosaurs. And some of those can be pretty dangerous. Cassowaries, for instance. They're basically living velociraptors. 6 feet tall, can run 30 miles per hour. And they have a 5-inch claw that can disembowel you. Professor Korthak's levitating chair began to sink slowly toward the floor, apparently giving up on the concept of defying gravity in a universe where humans casually coexisted with living velociraptors. And these cassowaries, he said with the tone of someone asking about the specific details of their own execution. Humans encounter these creatures. In Australia, Yeah, they're actually pretty shy, but they can be aggressive if they feel threatened. There are warning signs in some areas. Australians are pretty casual about most dangerous wildlife though. They've got a saying, everything in Australia is trying to kill you. It's mostly a joke, but there's some truth to it. Mostly a joke, Zara repeated, her crystalline structure now flickering so rapidly she was approaching the visible light spectrum's red shift limit. Well, Australia does have a lot of dangerous species concentrated in one area. Saltwater crocodiles, great white sharks, box jellyfish, blue-ringed octopi, funnel-web spiders, taipans, death adders, cone snails, stonefish, several species of highly venomous snakes, and that's just off the top of my head. Jake pulled out his notebook and flipped through a few pages. Actually, let me see if I can remember the full list my cousin sent me when she moved to Brisbane. There were about 47 species she was warned to watch out for in her immediate area. 47 species, Professor Korthak said, his voice taking on the quality of someone reading their own obituary. In her immediate area. Yeah, but most of them aren't aggressive toward humans unless provoked. And medical treatment has gotten really good. Antivenoms, emergency procedures, that sort of thing. Australia actually has a pretty good survival rate for dangerous animal encounters. The phrase pretty good survival rate seemed to be the final straw for several students' sanity. Gornax's humming stopped entirely, which in his species indicated either transcendental enlightenment or complete system shutdown. Mork's containment suit was now playing what sounded like a funeral dirge in B-flat minor. Bleep had gone completely silent, his compound eyes reflecting the amphitheater's emergency lighting in a way that suggested he was contemplating the fundamental meaninglessness of existence. Professor Korthak slowly rose from his chair, which had now settled completely on the floor, and appeared to have given up on the concept of levitation entirely. He moved to his holographic display controls with the deliberate movements of someone performing a sacred ritual. Computer, he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute defeat. Update the Galactic Predator Hierarchy database. The display flickered to life, showing the previous rankings with the Vorthan Death Serpent at the top, followed by the Crystal Mantis, the Shadow Stalkers, and the rest of the galaxy's most feared creatures. Reclassify Sol 3, designation Earth, from Class G Garden World to Class X Death World. Update threat assessment to, his forearms gestured helplessly. To maximum. The display updated, showing Earth's various predators cascading through the rankings like a hostile takeover of the food chain. Tigers settled in at number 15, just behind polar bears and ahead of saltwater crocodiles. Great white sharks claimed the number 8 spot. Army ants swarmed into the top 5. But at the very top of the list, in the number 1 position was a simple entry that made the entire amphitheater fall silent. Homo sapiens persistence predator, tool user, cooperative hunter. Responsible for large-scale ecosystem modification and species extinction events. Threat level, galactic. Humans, Professor Korthak said, staring at the display, are classified as the apex predator of a death world. Jake looked up from his notebook, genuinely surprised. Really? That seems kind of harsh. We're not that dangerous. The statement hung in the air like a challenge to the fundamental laws of irony. Professor Korthak turned to look at Jake with all 4 eyes, his expression suggesting he was seeing him for the first time. Mr. Morrison, what class are you taking after this? Jake checked his schedule, a simple paper printout that several students eyed like it was a weapon of mass destruction. Interstellar conflict resolution. Should be interesting. The professor said we'd be doing case studies on peaceful species integration. He stood up, gathering his primitive paper notebooks and his terrifying personal computer, completely oblivious to the fact that he had just redefined the entire galactic understanding of predator-prey relationships. Oh, one more thing, Jake said, pausing at the door. I forgot to mention that my roommate back home is a German Shepherd. That's a domesticated wolf, basically. We bred them down from apex predators to be companions and working animals. 150-pound wolf descendants that live in human homes and play with human children. He smiled cheerfully. See you all next week for the presentation on symbiotic relationships. The door closed behind him with a soft hiss, leaving the amphitheater in the kind of silence that usually follows either profound revelation or complete mental breakdown. Professor Korthak looked around at his students, all of whom appeared to be experiencing various stages of existential crisis, then back at his updated display showing Earth's creatures dominating the galactic predator hierarchy. Class dismissed, he said weakly, and for the first time in his academic career, nobody bothered to argue about the early dismissal. As the students filed out in stunned silence, the amphitheater's crystal formations continued to pulse with soft blue light, apparently still trying to process whether anything that had just been discussed qualified as academically significant. The crystals, it seemed, were having about as much success with that question as everyone else.